They say the perfect marriage is just an illusion. I learned that the hard way. While I was working late, my wife was working late too, just with another man. Most guys would lose their minds. But not me. I don't react. I calculate. That night, as she slept peacefully beside me, I was already planning my next move. Anna had always been careful. She was smart. She never left any traces. But the thing about smart people is they get comfortable. They think they're untouchable. They underestimate the person they're betraying. And that was her first mistake. The texts weren't anything explicit. She wasn't that reckless. But I didn't need them to be. Can't wait for Thursday Red Heart was enough. That simple, harmless little text was the equivalent of a bloodstained glove left at a crime scene. It told me there was something. And something was all I needed. I didn't confront her that morning. No accusations. No fights. Instead, I kissed her on the forehead before leaving for work, just like every other day. And when I stepped outside, I smiled. Not because I was happy, but because I had just realized something crucial. Anna thought she was playing me. But she had no idea that from this moment on, I was playing her. See, Anna was many things, beautiful, charming, intelligent, but she was also materialistic. She liked the finer things in life. The designer bags, the luxury vacations, the expensive gifts. And I gave her everything she wanted. She needed me for her lifestyle, for the image she had built for herself. Without me, she was nothing more than a pretty woman with expensive tastes and no way to afford them. And that's what made my revenge so perfect. I wasn't just going to expose her. I wasn't just going to leave her. I was going to take everything before she even saw it coming. I started small. A few financial adjustments here and there. Moved some money, rerouted some investments. Nothing she would notice. Not yet. I needed time to make sure everything was airtight. I wanted her to still feel safe while the ground beneath her was already gone. And as I worked on the plan, I played the role of the loving husband perfectly. Dinners, dates, small surprises. I made sure she had no reason to suspect. But I didn't just want financial revenge. I wanted proof. Extra nice. I followed her. Not too closely, not obviously. And when she pulled into a quiet hotel parking lot, I smiled. Not because I was surprised, I already knew, but because she had made my job so much easier. I didn't need to see more. I didn't need to storm in and make a scene. No, that wasn't my style. I wasn't going to stop her. That was the last night she would ever sleep in our bed, but she didn't know it yet. That was the last time she would walk through our front door as my wife, but she was completely unaware. Because by the time she found out, it would be too late. She thought she had played the perfect game. But the truth was, she had never even been a player. She was just another piece on my board. And now? Now it was checkmate. Every morning, she made me coffee. Every morning, she smiled like I was the only man in the world. Every morning, I believed her. Until the day I didn't. We had our routines. Sunday mornings were for lazy breakfasts and long walks in the park. Thursday evenings were our date nights, even if it was just takeout on the couch, wrapped in blankets while watching some movie we'd both seen a dozen times. She'd curl up against me, her fingers absent-mindedly tracing small patterns on my arm, and I'd think, this is it. This is what people mean when they talk about happiness. Our home was exactly what I had always wanted, warm, welcoming, filled with little details that made it ours. A framed picture of us from a trip to Greece hung in the hallway, capturing the moment right before we jumped off a boat into the clearest blue water I had ever seen. The bookshelves were a mess of her romance novels and my thrillers, a constant back and forth where she'd try to get me to read something emotional, and I'd challenge her to step outside her comfort zone with a dark mystery. Come on, I'd tease. Just one chapter. She'd roll her eyes but always give in, just like I'd pretend to grumble when she made me watch one of those melodramatic TV dramas she loved. It was give and take, balance. At least, that's what I thought. Looking back, there were signs, small things that didn't stand out at the time but, in retrospect, feel glaringly obvious. The way her phone, once casually left on the coffee table, started living in her pocket. The sudden interest in evening yoga classes when she had never been the type to care about fitness. The way she'd take longer and longer to get ready, applying perfume just to go to the grocery store. And yet, I ignored it. Because when you trust someone, truly trust them, you don't look for betrayals. You don't assume the worst. I worked long hours, building the business that gave us our comfortable life. I justified her occasional distance by blaming my own schedule. Maybe I should take some time off, I told her one evening as we sat across from each other at dinner. She hesitated just a fraction of a second before replying, her smile a little too forced. That would be nice, she said. But now I see it, the calculation behind her eyes. Back then, I thought she was just tired. We weren't perfect, of course. No marriages. There were disagreements, frustrations, the occasional cold silence after an argument. But they were normal. Or so I believed. Even when she became a little more impatient, a little less interested in our conversations, I assumed it was just a phase. People go through ups and downs. Relationships ebb and flow. I had no reason to suspect that while I was kissing her goodbye in the mornings, another man was waiting for her in the evenings. The cruelest part? I was still making plans for our future. I had been researching destinations for a surprise anniversary trip, something extravagant, a grand gesture to remind her how much she meant to me. I had even looked at new investment opportunities, thinking about how we could secure our life together long term. Every decision I made included her. Every dream I had was built around us. And all the while, she was slipping away. Not suddenly, not in an obvious way, just piece by piece, like a puzzle where some of the edges start to blur until you no longer recognize the full picture. But the thing about betrayal is that it doesn't happen all at once. It happens in moments, small, seemingly insignificant choices that, when added up, lead to something irreversible. The day before I found the text, she kissed me with just a little less warmth than usual. I remember that now, how her lips lingered for a second, but not in the way they used to. Not like she missed me. More like she was trying to convince herself that she still felt something. I didn't think much of it at the time. Just one of those things you brush off. I didn't know that night would be the last time I ever looked at her the same way. That the woman I had built my life around was already gone. That everything I thought was real had been replaced with a lie. And yet, even then, even after finding out, I didn't break. I didn't shatter. Because unlike Anna, I wasn't the kind of person who made impulsive decisions. No, I was patient. I was calculated. And while she thought she was getting away with it, I was already setting the stage for the moment she would lose everything. She just didn't know it yet. It started with something small. Something so insignificant that most people wouldn't have given it a second thought. But I did. Because when a machine runs smoothly for years, you notice even the slightest irregularity in its rhythm. And my marriage, for all its ups and downs, had a rhythm. A predictable, comfortable pattern. Until the night it changed. I was coming home later than usual, but not unexpectedly late, just a couple of hours past my usual time. I had texted Anna earlier, letting her know. Normally, she'd reply with something like, "All right, I'll wait for you," or want me to heat up dinner. But this time, she didn't respond. Not right away, at least. I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe she was busy. Maybe she had fallen asleep. But when I pulled into the driveway, something felt off. The house was dark. No kitchen lights. No soft glow from the living room TV. That wasn't like her. She never went to bed this early, and even when she did, she'd usually leave a light on for me. A small thing, a habit formed over years. And yet, tonight, nothing. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. Silence. The air felt different, like a room that had only recently been vacated. You know that strange stillness, that absence of warmth, as if the presence of life had just slipped away moments before? That's what it felt like. "Anna," I called out. A few seconds later, I heard movement upstairs. Light, hesitant footsteps, then the creak of a door. She appeared at the top of the stairs, rubbing her eyes as if she had just woken up. "Hey," she said, her voice a little hoarse. "You're home late." There was something rehearsed about the way she said it, as if she was too aware of the time. "I told you I'd be late." "Oh, right. I must have missed the message." She never missed my messages. She started walking down the stairs, and that's when I noticed she wasn't in her usual oversized t-shirt or her silk robe. She was fully dressed. Jeans, a fitted sweater, even her hair looked neatly styled. Not the way someone looks when they've been asleep for hours. My eyes flicked toward the couch. The throw blanket was crumpled, but the cushions weren't indented, like someone had placed the blanket there rather than actually using it. I didn't say anything right away. I just watched her. Studied the small things, the way she averted her gaze just a little too quickly, the way her fingers played with the hem of her sweater. "Long day?" I asked, keeping my tone casual. She nodded, forcing a yawn. "Yeah, just exhausted. I was watching TV, but I guess I dozed off. A small, normal excuse. One that should have been easy to accept. But something gnawed at me. The silence of the house. The way she had appeared upstairs instead of being curled up on the couch like she claimed. The too perfect yawn. The clothes that didn't match her story. Still, I didn't press. Not yet. Instead, I stepped closer, leaned in, and kissed her. A simple, routine gesture. But the moment my lips touched her cheek, I noticed it, the scent. Not her usual soft vanilla perfume, not even the lingering trace of the candles she liked to light in the evenings. No, this was different. Subtle but unmistakable. A cologne. A man's cologne. And just like that, the first crack in the perfect picture formed. I pulled back, watching for her reaction. If she had tensed, if she had hesitated even a second too long, I would have known for sure. But she was good. Too good. Did you have wine? I asked, glancing toward the counter. There were no glasses, no open bottles, nothing to suggest she had been relaxing downstairs as she claimed. She blinked, as if thrown off by the question. No. Why? I shrugged. You just smell different. That was the first real test. A tiny probe. A small drop of suspicion to see how she'd react. She let out a soft laugh, shaking her head. Oh, I used that new fabric spray on the couch. Maybe that's what you're smelling. A smooth answer. Quick. Too quick. I nodded, pretending to buy it. She walked past me into the kitchen, reaching for a glass of water. I watched as she took a sip, her back turned toward me. And that's when I noticed the final detail. The back door. The one leading to her garden. The lock was still turned. Anna was always careful about locking doors. Always. But tonight, it was still unlocked. It was such a tiny thing. So easy to dismiss. But added together with everything else, the silence of the house, the clothes that didn't match her story, the faint trace of cologne, the unlocked door, it painted a picture. Not a clear one. Not yet. But a picture nonetheless. I didn't call her out on it. I didn't demand answers. I simply took in every detail, every inconsistency, and stored it away. That night, as she climbed into bed beside me, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The scent was still in the air, faint but present. And for the first time, I let the thought settle in. Something wasn't right. And I was going to find out exactly what. I had always believed that trust was built on certainty, on knowing someone so well that their actions, their habits, their routines became second nature to you. But now, every little thing Anna did felt calculated, rehearsed, artificial. And I wasn't just going to sit back and hope for the best. Hope is for men who want to be deceived. I, on the other hand, had decided to know. The night after that first slip, the scent of cologne, the unlocked door, the rushed excuses, I started watching. Not in an obvious way. I didn't want her to feel my suspicion. No, I needed her to think she was still ahead, that she was still controlling the narrative. But in reality, the moment she stepped into that house, I was studying her like an equation that didn't quite add up. It didn't take long for the next red flag to appear. She had always been open with her phone, leaving it on the coffee table, casually scrolling through it next to me, sometimes even asking me to respond to texts when she was cooking or in the shower. But suddenly, that changed. Her phone, once an afterthought, was now an extension of her hand. She carried it everywhere, even to the bathroom. At night, it used to rest on her nightstand, screen facing up, unlocked with a simple swipe. Now, it was face down, locked with a passcode. A new passcode. The first time I noticed it, I didn't react. I simply logged the information. When did she change it? A week ago? 2? Had it been after the night I came home late? That was the question I needed to answer. A few days later, I decided to test her. Over breakfast, while she was sipping her coffee, I reached for her phone casually, like I had done 100 times before. Hey, can you check if my sister texted? I asked, pretending to be too distracted with my own work emails. Her reaction was instant, too instant. She pulled the phone toward her, pressing the power button before sliding it away with a forced smile. Oh, I actually put it on silent. Didn't hear anything? A mistake. She never put her phone on silent in the mornings. She always had it buzzing with notifications, scrolling through messages, replying to her friends. But now, suddenly, she wanted silence? I didn't press. I just let the moment hang in the air, watching as she forced herself to act normal. Then I smiled, nodding. Makes sense. You've been working hard. Probably need the quiet. She relaxed. Good. She thought she had covered it up, but I had just confirmed two things. First, there was something on that phone she didn't want me to see. And second, she was aware enough of her own deception to know when to panic. That was when I started planning. The first step was tracking her movements, not obsessively, not in a way that would make her suspect anything. Just subtle, quiet observations. Where she said she was going versus where she actually went. I started asking small, harmless questions about her schedule, things a husband would normally ask. What time is yoga tonight? Are you meeting up with Sarah again after work? How was lunch with your mom? Simple. Innocent. But I was watching how she answered. And more importantly, how quickly the answers changed. One evening, she said she was meeting Sarah for dinner. An hour later, I casually texted Sarah, keeping it light. Hey, tell Anna not to order too much wine. She'll make me drive her home again. The response came minutes later. Anna? We're not meeting tonight. Why? I stared at the message for a moment, letting the weight of it settle. Another lie. A small one, but it confirmed what I already knew. Her world was no longer aligned with mine. I didn't confront her. Not yet. Instead, I started gathering everything: patterns, inconsistencies, contradictions. She had no idea that every time she thought she was getting away with something, she was actually giving me another puzzle piece. Then came the most obvious mistake. She had mentioned, in passing, that she was working late on Thursday. A team project, last-minute deadlines, something plausible enough not to raise suspicion. But by now, I wasn't just listening to her words. I was analyzing them. That evening, instead of staying home, I drove to her office building, parking a safe distance away. The place was practically empty. Most of the floors were dark. No movement. No sign of an all-hands-on-deck emergency. I called her. She answered immediately. Hey, babe, she said, her voice light, too light. Still at work. It's such a mess here. I looked at the empty parking lot, the darkened windows. Yeah, I said, keeping my tone casual. Who else is there with you? A pause. Then a quick, forced response. Oh, just a few of us. Tom, Julia, Mark. You know, the usual late-night crew. She said it too fast, too prepared, as if she had already come up with the lie before I even asked. I smiled to myself. Gotcha. But I didn't call her out on it. No, that would have been too easy. Instead, I let her think she had fooled me. I told her I loved her, said I'd see her later, and hung up. Then, I waited. 10 minutes later, I watched as she walked out of a completely different building, one that wasn't her office. She wasn't alone. A man followed close behind, walking just a little too comfortably beside her. She glanced around once before getting into her car, probably making sure no one was watching. But someone was watching. And now, it wasn't just suspicion. It wasn't just small inconsistencies. It was the truth, unfolding right in front of me. She thought she was playing the perfect game. But what she didn't realize was that I had stopped being her opponent a long time ago. Now, I was just the man keeping score. There's a moment when suspicion turns into certainty. A cold, sharp moment that cuts through denial, through excuses, through every false hope that maybe, just maybe, you were wrong. That moment came for me at exactly 11:42 p.m. on a Thursday night. The night I stopped being a husband and became something else entirely, a man with a plan. I had followed Anna before, but always from a distance, always careful not to push too hard too soon. But that night, I didn't have to follow her. I already knew where she was going. I had checked her phone earlier. No, I hadn't cracked her new passcode. I didn't need to. The one thing she had underestimated about me was just how much I paid attention to details, to patterns. Anna had grown cocky, careless. She thought changing her passcode would keep me out, but she forgot one thing: she was still connected to our shared iCloud. That meant every photo she took, every call she made, every appointment she added to her calendar was still syncing to my laptop. And that's how I saw it. A single, seemingly harmless entry in her calendar, labeled dinner with S. The initials meant nothing to me at first, but the location did. A restaurant we had been to before. An expensive, intimate place, one that was booked weeks in advance. Not the kind of place you go for a business dinner or a casual night out with a friend. No, this was a place where you whispered over candlelight, where fingers brushed across tabletops, where affairs felt safe under dim lighting and soft music. That was all I needed. I could have confronted her right then, sent her a screenshot, called her, and listened to her stumble through excuses. But I wasn't looking for words. I was looking for proof. So I went there. I didn't rush, didn't let the adrenaline make me reckless. I arrived early, long before their reservation, and found a seat at the bar, just out of view of the main dining area. I told the bartender I was waiting for someone and ordered a drink I had no intention of finishing. Then I waited. And then, at exactly 8:07 p.m., she arrived. She was smiling, that soft, teasing smile I had seen 1,000 times before, the one she used when she was excited, when she wanted to impress. Her hair was done differently, subtle but noticeable. She was wearing a dress I hadn't seen before. And then, just a few steps behind her, he walked in. Tall, well-dressed, confident. A man who had no idea that the husband of the woman he was sleeping with was sitting just a few feet away, watching every move. I didn't need to see more, but I stayed anyway. I wanted to see how she looked at him, how she leaned in when he spoke, how she laughed at whatever meaningless thing he was saying. I watched as he reached across the table and touched her hand, as her fingers curled slightly in response. I had been replaced. No, not replaced. That would mean she had left me for him. But she hadn't. She had been living a double life, playing both sides, taking everything I had built for her and using it to fuel this. I clenched my jaw, but I didn't move. This wasn't the time for anger. Not yet. I needed more. I pulled out my phone, angling it carefully. A few discreet photos, her laughing, her leaning in, their hands touching. Enough. I could feel my pulse hammering in my ears as I stood up, leaving my untouched drink on the bar. I could have walked straight to their table, could have made a scene, thrown his drink in his face, demanded answers. But that would have been emotional. That would have been weak. And I wasn't weak. I was strategic. I walked out of the restaurant without looking back. I already had everything I needed. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my office, staring at the pictures, at the undeniable, indisputable evidence that my wife was a liar, a cheat, a woman who had smiled at me that very morning while knowing she had a dinner date with another man just hours later. And yet, despite the anger, despite the betrayal burning in my chest, I didn't feel broken. I felt clear. Anna had played her game well, but she had made one fatal mistake. She thought I was just another man who would crumble, who would lash out, who would let emotions dictate his actions. She was wrong. Because now, I had the truth. And with the truth came power. Power to make sure that by the time she realized what was happening, she would have nothing left. I sat in my office, the glow of my laptop screen casting sharp shadows across the room. The pictures of Anna and her lover stared back at me, silent proof of her betrayal. I could have deleted them, pretended I never saw them, let things play out in the typical way, confrontation, apologies, maybe even an ugly divorce. But that wasn't me. I had never been the kind of man who let things happen to him. I was the kind who made things happen. And right now, I was going to make sure that by the time Anna realized what was happening, she would be standing in the ruins of everything she once took for granted. The question wasn't if I was going to destroy her, it was how. A public humiliation? Too simple. A physical confrontation with her lover? Too predictable. No. Anna deserved something deeper, something that would unravel her carefully constructed life piece by piece until she had no idea how it all fell apart. And I already knew exactly where to start. Anna's entire identity was built on image. She wasn't just a woman who loved nice things, she was a woman who needed them. The expensive clothes, the designer bags, the lavish vacations, these weren't just luxuries for her. They were the foundation of how she saw herself, how she wanted others to see her. Without them, she was just another woman with a pretty face and expensive taste she couldn't afford on her own. And that was her greatest weakness. I opened our joint financial accounts and smiled. Anna had never been interested in how money worked. She spent it, she enjoyed it, but she never understood it. That was my role. She had no idea that I had full control over our assets, that every credit card she used, every account she relied on, every financial safety net she believed existed was tied to me. So I started the process. Slowly, methodically. I moved our liquid assets into a separate account, one she couldn't access. I adjusted the ownership of certain investments, making sure her name disappeared from them entirely. I loaned a large sum of money to a separate business entity, an entity that I owned, but one she had no legal connection to. To anyone looking in from the outside, it would just look like business as usual, financial restructuring. But in reality, it was the equivalent of pulling the rug out from under her feet, inch by inch. The next step was more personal. Our house was legally mine. When we had bought it, I had handled all the paperwork, and because Anna had never been interested in those details, she had simply signed where I told her to. Now, that decision was about to cost her everything. I contacted my lawyer and started the process of transferring the house into a trust where she had no stake. Soon, the walls she lived in, the luxury she surrounded herself with, would no longer belong to her. But the final blow? That had to be precise, surgical. It had to be something she would never see coming, something that would rip away not just her lifestyle, but the very foundation of her security. That's when I thought of him, the man she had risked everything for, the man she believed was her escape, her secret indulgence. What if he wasn't what she thought he was? What if he wasn't her future, but just another problem waiting to explode? I did my research. It didn't take long. He was married, a wife, 2 kids, a family man who had somehow found the time to sneak away for secret dinners with my wife. That was the leverage I needed. I gathered everything, screenshots of their messages, photos from their little rendezvous, timestamps, locations. A package of undeniable evidence, neatly compiled and ready to be delivered. But not to him. No, that would be too easy, too expected. Instead, it would go straight to his wife. The beauty of it was in the timing. By the time she received that package, Anna would already be cut off financially. She would already be scrambling, already feeling the walls closing in. And just when she thought she could run to him, just when she thought he would be her escape, he would be too busy trying to save his own marriage to offer her anything. And me? I would be watching it all unfold, calm, composed, untouched. The best revenge isn't loud. It isn't messy. It isn't impulsive. The best revenge is a slow, precise unraveling of everything they thought was secure, a quiet dismantling of the life they took for granted. And by the time Anna realized what had happened, by the time she understood that this wasn't just bad luck or a coincidence, it would be too late. She thought she was playing a game. She had no idea I had already won. Timing was everything. Every move I made had to be precise, calculated. I wasn't just going to let Anna fall. I was going to watch as she realized the ground beneath her had already disappeared. The beauty of my plan was that by the time she understood what was happening, it would already be over. The first step was subtle, psychological. I didn't act any differently around her. No cold stares, no passive-aggressive comments, no hints of what was coming. I played my role perfectly, the devoted husband, the man who had no idea that his wife was sneaking around behind his back. I kissed her goodbye in the mornings, asked about her day, even planned a surprise weekend getaway for us, something that kept her completely distracted while I put the final pieces of my plan in place. She was still seeing him, of course. I knew that. She thought she was being careful, thought she was keeping her tracks covered. But I had been one step ahead from the beginning. While she was meeting him in hotel rooms and quiet restaurants, I was emptying our joint accounts, rerouting our finances, shifting assets so that by the time she reached for them, they wouldn't be there. The house, already out of her name. The credit card she depended on, about to be canceled. The car she drove, technically mine. She just didn't know it yet. Then came the moment of impact. It started with a simple email, sent from an anonymous account, of course, to her lover's wife. The evidence was all there. The screenshots, the timestamps, the receipts. No explanation was needed. Just cold, undeniable truth. I knew exactly how she would react. She wouldn't confront him immediately. No, she would let the rage simmer first, let the doubt and paranoia build until it became unbearable. And then, when the moment was right, she would strike. I had anticipated everything. The confrontation between them, the panic, the moment when he would reach out to Anna, looking for reassurance, for damage control. And that was when I played my next card. Anna came home that night, looking distracted, her phone practically glued to her hand. She was texting, probably him, her expression shifting between frustration and barely concealed panic. I pretended not to notice. Instead, I poured us a glass of wine, acting as if it was just another evening, as if I wasn't watching her carefully, waiting for her to crack. And then, right on cue, her phone rang. She hesitated, just for a second, before answering. "Hey," she said, forcing a casual tone. But I could hear the tension in her voice. The fear. She turned slightly away from me, lowering her voice as if I wouldn't notice. Amateur mistake. I took a slow sip of my wine and let her finish her whispered conversation. When she turned back to me, she tried to smile, but I saw the panic behind her eyes. Work thing, she muttered. Everything okay? I asked, my voice calm, unreadable. She nodded too quickly. Yeah, just a small problem with a client. I held her gaze for a moment longer than necessary, just enough to make her uncomfortable. Then I smiled and nodded. I'm sure you'll handle it. She exhaled, probably thinking she had avoided a problem. Poor thing. She had no idea the storm that was already crashing down around her. The next day, I made my move. I had booked a dinner reservation, her favorite restaurant. A romantic night out, just the two of us. She was visibly tense but agreed, probably desperate to act normal. She even put in extra effort, did her hair, wore the dress she knew I liked. It was almost funny, watching her try to play the loving wife while her world was burning behind her. Halfway through dinner, her phone buzzed. She glanced at it, and in that instant, I knew. Him. I leaned forward, watching her carefully. Go ahead, I said. Check it. She hesitated. It's nothing. Are you sure? I tilted my head slightly. You seem a little distracted tonight. She forced a smile. Just work stress. I let the silence stretch between us, then set down my fork and pulled out my own phone. You know, I've been feeling a little off lately. Just getting this weird feeling. I tapped my screen a few times. So I did a little digging. Her smile faltered. Just slightly. What do you mean? I turned my phone around, showing her the first picture, her and him at the restaurant, holding hands. Her face drained of color. I swiped to the next image. Them at the hotel entrance. Then the next, a screenshot of their messages. She inhaled sharply, her hands trembling slightly as she set down her glass. I can explain. I leaned back in my chair, watching her squirm. Oh, I know you can. But the real question is, should you? She swallowed hard, looking around as if searching for an escape. But there was none. And then, I delivered the final blow. I reached into my jacket pocket and slid a small envelope across the table. She hesitated before opening it. Inside? The official notice that her credit cards had been canceled, that the house was no longer in her name, that her financial safety net was gone. I watched as the reality of it all sank in. Her lover? About to be exposed and thrown into his own personal disaster. Her money? Cut off. Her home? No longer hers. She looked up at me, tears welling in her eyes. Why are you doing this? I smiled. A slow, deliberate smile. Because you thought you were playing me. I stood up, tossing some cash onto the table for the bill. But the truth is, Anna, you were never in control. And then I walked out, leaving her sitting there, staring at the wreckage of her own making. Anna sat frozen in her chair, staring at the envelope with wide, disbelieving eyes. Her fingers trembled as she flipped through the documents, the credit card cancellations, the house ownership transfer, the financial statements that made it clear she no longer had access to a single cent of my money. Her lips parted, but no words came out. For the first time, she was truly speechless. I let the silence hang between us, savoring the moment. I wanted her to feel this, the exact same helplessness, the same sinking dread that had settled in my gut the night I found out the truth. Except for me, it had been brief. A moment of impact before I took control. But for her, this wasn't a moment. This was just the beginning. Her breathing quickened, her gaze darting around the restaurant like a trapped animal looking for an escape. But there was none. Why are you doing this? Her voice was barely above a whisper, hoarse with fear. I tilted my head, studying her. Why? I repeated, as if the question itself was absurd. You really don't understand? She swallowed hard, her throat working against the rising panic. She hesitated, searching for the right words. I made a mistake. But it wasn't what you think. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table, keeping my voice calm. Oh? Then what was it, Anna? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks exactly like what I think it is. Her hands clutched the edge of the table as she shook her head frantically. No, it wasn't serious. It didn't mean anything. I swear. I exhaled slowly, watching her unravel. That's an interesting defense. Let's test it. I pulled out my phone and tapped a few buttons. Your mistake is about to cost your lover his family. His wife should be opening that little package of evidence right about now. Her eyes widened in horror. No, No, you didn't. I met her gaze, my expression unwavering. Oh, but I did. She clutched her chest, her breath coming in short gasps as reality started sinking in. I leaned back, watching her carefully. So let's go over this again. You say it wasn't serious, that it didn't mean anything. But tell me, Anna, if it was nothing, why does it feel like your whole world is crumbling right now? Tears welled in her eyes, spilling over onto her cheeks. She reached across the table, her voice breaking. Please, we can fix this. I'll stop. I swear. Just don't do this. I stared at her hand, then at her face. The desperation, the sheer terror in her eyes. It was almost convincing. Almost. But I wasn't here to be convinced. You already did this, Anna. I'm just making sure you feel the consequences. She shook her head violently. But I love you. It was just. I held up a finger, cutting her off. Careful. Think very carefully about your next words. She froze, her lips quivering, her mind racing for an excuse that didn't exist. I let the silence stretch, let her drown in it. Then I stood up. This dinner was a courtesy, I said, adjusting my jacket. A way of letting you know what's happening before the rest of the world does. When you go home, I let a smirk touch my lips. Oh, wait. You don't have a home anymore. My mistake. Her face twisted in pain, fresh tears slipping down her cheeks. You can't do this, she whispered. I sighed, feigning sympathy. Anna, I already did. She gripped the table, her knuckles turning white. Where am I supposed to go? I shrugged. Not my problem. She let out a choked sob, but I could see it now. She was starting to understand. The money? Gone. The house? Not hers. Her lover? About to be dealing with a storm of his own. Her security, her comfort, her entire world, disappearing before her eyes, piece by piece. I gave her one last look, as if memorizing the exact moment she realized she had lost everything. Then, without another word, I turned and walked away. Anna's fall wasn't immediate. It wasn't one explosive moment of destruction. No, it was slower than that. Painfully slow, like watching a grand building collapse brick by brick, each piece crumbling under the weight of its own foundation. And the best part? She had no way to stop it. The first blow came within 24 hours of our dinner. Her lover's wife didn't waste a second. The moment she opened that package, her world detonated. She confronted him, threw him out, made sure every single one of their mutual friends knew exactly what kind of man he was. And Anna? She had no idea how badly she had miscalculated. Because for all the time she had spent sneaking around with him, for all the stolen moments, the whispered conversations, the lies she had told me and herself, he had never planned on leaving his wife. She was never his future. She was just a distraction. He blocked her, changed his number, wiped her from his life as if she had never existed. And just like that, the man she had risked everything for was gone. But that was only the beginning. The financial fallout hit her next. At first, she must have thought there was some mistake. Maybe a system error. Maybe a bank issue. But as she tried to access her accounts, use her cards, check her credit, the truth must have started sinking in. The safety net she had always relied on, me, was gone. The home she had decorated, the life she had built on my dime, the luxury she had taken for granted, it wasn't hers anymore. And when she finally called, when she finally let her pride slip just enough to dial my number, I didn't even answer. She left a voicemail. I never listened to it. Just deleted it without a second thought. By the end of the week, the fallout had reached her friends, our friends. Of course, I made sure of that. You'd be surprised how quickly people turn their backs when they realize someone isn't who they pretended to be. The sympathy she expected? It never came. The invitations dried up. The messages stopped. No one wanted to be associated with the woman who had burned her own life to the ground. Even her own family wasn't an option. She had spent years looking down on them, convincing herself she was better, that she had outgrown them. But when she came crawling back, looking for a place to stay, looking for a lifeline, she found none. They let her crash on a couch for a few nights, maybe out of obligation, maybe because they still didn't fully understand what had happened. But it didn't last. And then, the final blow. She had always loved the image of being a woman of status, a woman of value. But status is fragile. Image is built on perception. And when people stop seeing you as someone important, someone to admire, someone to respect. There's no coming back from that. I heard she was working a retail job now. Something small. Something that barely covered rent for whatever tiny apartment she managed to scrape together. I never reached out, never checked on her, never gave her the satisfaction of knowing if I even thought about her. Because I didn't. The best revenge isn't just about destruction. It's about making sure the person who wronged you knows, truly knows, that they no longer matter. Anna had gambled everything and lost. And I had never been freer. Months passed, and life moved on. For me, at least. I rebuilt, I thrived. Without the weight of betrayal dragging me down, everything felt lighter, clearer. I traveled. I focused on myself. I surrounded myself with people who were real, who weren't just playing a part in some selfish game. The world felt open again, full of possibilities that I had ignored while wasting time on someone who never truly valued what she had. But Anna? She had no such luxury. I never heard from her again, not directly. I didn't need to. The echoes of her downfall reached me in other ways, whispers from old acquaintances, the occasional glimpse into her new, much smaller life. I heard she had tried reaching out to some of our former friends, looking for sympathy, for a way back into the circles she once felt entitled to. But those doors were closed. She had burned every bridge, and when she finally realized it, there was no way back. Some people would ask if I ever regretted it. If there was ever a moment where I felt guilt, where I thought maybe I had gone too far. The answer? No. Not for a second. Because here's the truth, people like Anna don't change. If I had just walked away, if I had simply confronted her and left, she would have moved on, found another man to manipulate, another safety net to fall into. She would have rewritten the narrative, painted herself as the victim, twisted the truth until it suited her. But this way? There was no rewriting, no alternative story she could sell to herself or others. The consequences were real, undeniable, and she had no one to blame but herself. In the end, she learned the most important lesson of all: betrayal is a debt, and debts always get paid. So now, I ask you, what would you have done? Would you have let it go? Walked away? Or would you have made sure she felt what she had done, the way I did? Because when someone takes everything you've built and treats it like nothing, do they really deserve to walk away unscathed?